My name is Jerin. Jerin Arifa. I'm so happy to be back at Hunter. I went to college here.
Yeah, love that.
I was an undergrad, and so much of who I am as a person is because I went to Hunter, is actually because of Carmelina Cartei, who is hosting this event in her class and who organized this. Carmelina, for many years, has been the faculty liaison for Vagina Monologues on campus and has just done amazing work. So I owe so much to who I am, to Carmelina, to the Women Gender Studies Department here. How many of you are familiar with the Women Gender Studies Department? Most of you. They're fantastic. Like, I can't say enough good things about them. They're incredible, not just for the courses, but just who they are as people. After I graduated, well, actually, while I was at Hunter, I was one of two students who created the CUNY-wide sexual assault policy, which was interesting because we are the largest public urban university in the country. So it was an interesting bureaucracy. After I graduated, I founded the first virtual chapter of the National Organization for Women, NOW. How many of you are familiar with NOW? Handful of you. So NOW is the largest grassroots feminist organization in the country. So what really separates NOW from other organizations is that we're completely democratic, meaning the members get to decide on everything from who the officers are to what the issues that the various chapters will focus on. So no other organization in the country has this direct democratic structure. So any of you could go into NOW, run for office, and run the organization.
That's amazing.
And it's especially useful for the type of topics we'll be talking about because, you know, people of color, non-rich people, basically non-rich, white, cis male, don't have access to a lot of places and power. And when you have representative democracy, it does help level the playing field a little bit more. It's still not completely level, but it does help. And I'm really excited to be back here. I had spoken to Carmelina about this event because after the election, I went to this event with a lot of writers who get paid for crafting words. That's their job. They get paid to craft words. And one of the women, feminists identifying, was very upset because I corrected her when she used the term illegal to refer to immigrants. And I was kind of taken back because if you're getting paid to craft words, you should understand why they're so important and why they're so powerful. So I'll leave it at that. And if you want to introduce yourself.
My name's Sonia Romulus. I graduated from Clark University, my degree in psychology and theater, performing arts. What I did while I was at Clark is really just incorporating how I could use language and theater to push political agendas and change and work on advocacy. I was sexually assaulted during my undergrad, and I feel like the school did not do anything to help me at the time. So what I did instead was I wrote a play that got produced on campus, and I was very unapologetic. I used the names, I exposed the university. It got attention of Brown University, so it started to get produced in Rhode Island as well. And after I started to give them, you know, kind of a bad name, that's when policies and change was initiated. My play was about a satire about rape and race culture, and that's again using satirical language to try to diffuse discomfort, but at the same time get awareness and get attention and make change. So after I had done that, that's when Clark University had initiated this diversity and inclusion chapter, and that's when they started to have all these new initiatives for rape counseling and investigations. They hired a new, like, I don't know what they're called, the director of something, so they investigate these sort of assaults on campus. But before that, Clark was silent, so I made a lot of noise.
My name is Florcy, and I also graduated from Clark. I got my master's in community development and planning last year. So I'm the founder of Women of Color in Solidarity, and it's the coalition of women of color, and we work to heal, educate, and liberate each other. And we just had our first annual conference this past weekend where we kind of got a whole bunch of women from different sectors who organize and like host workshops on ancestral healing, education for the practice of freedom, and other topics specifically catered to women of color. So.
Rewriting your trauma narrative. I ran that.
Hi everyone, I'm Valerie. I'm a licensed social worker at Barrier Free Living. My background is I went to undergrad to study psych. I also picked up minors in deaf studies and women and gender studies, so that's when I really sort of incorporated both the psychology and learning more about minority groups and oppression and things like that. Now me and Gabby, we work at Barrier Free Living, which is a nonprofit that works with people with disabilities. We represent the Secret Garden program, which is a non-residential domestic violence program. So we provide counseling, case management, occupational therapy to survivors who also identify as having a disability.
Thanks. Oh, as Valerie said, I'm Gabby. I went to SUNY Plattsburgh for undergrad, where I actually have a bachelor's in communication disorders, but I also minored in psychology and did a certificate program in gender and women's studies. I got my master's in social work at Fordham here in the city. So like Valerie said, I'm also a social worker at the Secret Garden program of Barrier Free Living. And so we really are the only program in New York City that works specifically with the intersectionality of domestic violence and disability.
It's important.
Okay. Let's follow protocol. Let's acknowledge the original ancestral homelands of the Lenape people. This is their home, the island of Manhattan. You're occupying the land of the Lenape people. So let's acknowledge them and their ancestral homelands as we leave our footprints here. So that once that protocol is done, I can introduce myself and my nation and the people that I represent. Dagot Shishti, Noel Altaha, Shema, J. Velasquez, Wananse, Shita, Timothy Altaha, Wananse, Yankayishli, Tagainishli. So I said, I'm happy to be here with you all. I'm honored to sit here with you all. And I come from the nation White Mountain Apache. So it's Zithligai, which is mountain that is white, so the snowy mountains. And we're land-based people. We follow the natural law. We don't follow the economic, European, scientific method law. We follow the nature. And so I come from the clan of Eagle, and that's my genetic memory, my connection, my kinship. My ancestors were here before here existed. We were here since time immemorial. We weren't sitting around waiting for Europeans to come by in 1492. We were at work. We were busy working. My people plant corn. We fished. We wove baskets. We were very busy. We still have a diverse genetic, biodiverse agricultural economy that was sustainable. So that's where I come from in present day Arizona. Arizona just celebrated its 100 years centennial anniversary. We don't celebrate that. It's a reminder of what was taken by force and what continues to be taken by force. So that's my background and my accolades. I have my bachelor's in psychology and my master's in social work at Columbia University. And I teach at Columbia, and I also do outreach to teach folks about composting in New York City. And because it all goes back to the land, no matter what. And our connection to each other through using words will eventually connect us back to the land, connect us back to water, which is where we all came from. And we all came from water. We all came from our mother's womb. And so we need to remember that. And so I'm just thankful to be here.
Well, thank you, everybody. We really want this to be more interactive. This is something that us panelists talked about a lot. We didn't want this to be like us talking to you. So please raise your hands, make comments, ask questions. I thought maybe we could just spend a couple of minutes, each one of us, talking about some of the words that maybe deal with our identities that we find problematic. So I can go first. This whole thing started because a writer was using the term illegal, and it's something that obviously bothered me very much. I was undocumented myself. It was a very traumatic experience. I don't know if any of you have friends or family members who are undocumented, it's extremely traumatic, it's extremely scary, because basically you know that even if somebody does something really bad to you, you can't go to the police, because that would be more dangerous for you. And it's a very vulnerable place to be in. Every job I had when I was undocumented, I was exploited in some way, because the employers knew they could do that to me. So when this woman kept saying the term illegal, it was so hurtful. I think, the nursery rhyme, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is terrible. Yeah. And psychologists and social workers will tell you that it's terrible, because in fact, words can actually have much longer term effects where broken bones might heal. To me, human beings cannot be legal or illegal. I cannot say that an entire person's existence is legal or illegal. The whole idea of a person being less than human is what was used to enslave people. Yep. They were literally told they were 3/5 of a person. So to me, that is so violent. That feels violent. And so when we say illegal anything, we are literally reducing a person to an object. And when we can dehumanize somebody and we can reduce them to an object, it's so much easier to not only hurt them,
To feel no remorse.
but to feel and to destroy them. Like I don't feel as bad about maybe tearing up a piece of paper as I would, hitting somebody. I shouldn't, because I don't have the same emotional connection. I have some handouts I can give out afterward, but Men Can't Stop Rape has a really great comparison of how rape and racism are related. And one of the things that roots them both together is that they both use words as weapons. Yeah. So racism, there are just so many offensive, horrible, racially charged words that are used. All of us are familiar with racially charged words that are used. Me as a Muslim woman, Muslims are called terrorists, towelheads, ragheads, that send N-word. Again, all of these words are used to dehumanize. Women are often called the B word. They're called dogs, again, less than human. If a woman is very attractive, she is called a bombshell. Again, less than human. You are not a person if you're a bombshell. Women are also infantilized. They're called girls. Again, you're not giving the same respect as an adult, which that's a whole other conversation of why we don't give children same respect as adults. But again, all these words are used to tell somebody they are not as human as you, so that we can harm them and really think about it as collateral damage instead of human damage.
Oh, I didn't know if you. Okay. I would like to talk about two words. Well, you've had two constructs that you used: race in relations with rape, and those are the two constructs that I use to write my play. I don't like the word victim, and I feel like after I'd been assaulted, I was not called a survivor, and I survived, I thrived. I could have been dead, I could have been killed, and I was not, and I survived. Every day I'm surviving, every day I'm thriving when I want to give up. I have PTSD, and to be called a victim all the time, that was my university's reaction to helping me. Every pamphlet they gave me to fill out, or people call it, said victim, 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 and that desensitized me, and that made me feel like, wait, I thrived, I survived, why are you removing me and minimizing me to nothing but a victim? And so talking about race, what had inspired me to write my play was when I had this event happened at my university by somebody that was in a higher position, he called me the N-word. And that was the first time in my life I'd ever been called a nigger. And it just made me just look in the mirror and just have to regress my identity. My grandmother, I was raised by her. Her father is Syrian and her mother is Taino. She's indigenous. Those are my roots. That's my culture. Christopher Columbus came, destroyed my people, my island, my ancestry. So when I told my grandmother this, and I was like, Grandma, he called me a nigger. And she looked at me and she's like, how are you a nigger? I don't understand. I'm not. So she just did not understand in her eyes that somebody could call me something like that. And it just played such a huge part of my identity because I don't look like my grandmother, but she's who raised me and she's in my blood and she's who I am. So those two things kind of just inspired me to write a play about what happened. And yeah.
I would also love if you could talk about other people using that.
Yeah, I think that using the N-word by other races, for me, it's very interesting. So there's a big difference between nigger and nigga. I never used the word nigga until college. And a lot of people are just like so confused. Like, I don't understand. Like, where I grew up, I'm not ashamed. I'm a product of the hood. But I got out of there. I'm educating. I'm giving back to my community. So that's part of our culture. The word, that's just how we communicate. And it's bringing back that people had used this language to oppress us, and we're taking it back. It's the same way as Florcy and I, we call each other, it might be problematic to others, but bitch all the time.
Yeah, that's my bitch.
All the time. Like, because you're using this word and you're trying to oppress us, we're going to take this word back and we're going to empower each other. So it is very problematic when other people think that they can be part of this culture. I see this all the time. Like, the first time I ever went to a party in my undergrad, I walked in, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the song, what's the song? Stay scheming, niggas trying to... Rick Ross. Bowling, yeah, so it was crazy because my friends were like, yo, I started working at the athletic department. That's when everyone was like, oh, look at this pretty colored girl with the nice eyes, like, let's invite her everywhere. So I was like, whatever, like, I don't go to parties, let me do this. In my mind, a party that's part of our culture, like, we dance. That's what I'm going to party for. I hear music, I'm dancing. I walk in, of course, there's only white people, and all of them in unison, stay scheming, nigga, and it was like some way the universe was trying to, as soon as they said nigga, I walked in, and everyone got silent and looked at me, because I'm like, wow, like, you guys find so much power in this word, and there's several white men and several bros I've spoken to, and they're like, yeah, when we're not around black people, we use that word all the time to each other. But for me, I felt like going to college, people were already putting the stereotype onto me, that's what I was, so I was bringing back the word and using it all the time, and occasionally that's the way I speak. Like, I'm from a product of the hood. I'll slip up sometimes. I'm really getting excited and talking about politics or talking about something that really engaged me in class. I dropped it once on a professor who's from Britain, whatever, and he's like, excuse me, Franny, did you just call me a nigga? And I'm like, if I am one, you are too. And I had a professor who, he asked me and got in huge trouble with the dean. He's like, I think she plagiarized this paper. There's no way that, I've never given out 100% in my whole career, in all the years I've been teaching. She must have plagiarized that, because how can a woman from her background and the way she speaks during class, how could she possibly write this paper? What's duality? And that's the thing. It's very frustrating for us to feel like when we're entering white spaces, our language has to change. We're wearing all these different hats all the time, and that just gets so exhausting. So yeah, that's my little spiel on the N-word. Any other language?
Yeah. So for people in the audience, we handed out a sheet earlier that we're hoping that we can make it a little bit more interactive. I don't know if the panelists would like a copy as well.
Over there.
Yeah, there are a lot more. We have a lot.
Sure.
Here you go. So for those of you who are not in person, we have a sheet that has 2 columns, one of them being problematic statements that people with disabilities hear all the time. And then on the right of that, there are blank spaces for, we're hoping to have a conversation about what is the more appropriate type of language that we can use to treat these people with respect that they deserve.
So when you're looking at it, you'll see pronouns being used, you'll see labels being used. So when we're thinking about inclusive language, we want everybody to be thinking about all of those things. We're thinking about gender identity, and we're thinking about disability. Now, some of the terms on here, you may think, well, that's ridiculous. That's an outdated term. I hear this stuff all the time. I hear it from other professionals. So while it may seem obvious, some of these, it's really not. So that's why we wanted to bring some of these up for everybody to start thinking about things in another way. So before we start going through, the other thing I want you to think about, has anyone heard of person first language? Anybody? No. Okay. So it's kind of a social worky term, but it's, made its way. So when we talk about person first language, what we're saying is a person is a person first and foremost. Whatever their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their race, ethnicity, disability, that's secondary. That may be a part of them, but they're a person first and foremost. So what happens, especially with people who have disabilities, is they get described as their disability. Essentially what everyone's been saying, erasing the rest of their identity. So we want to be mindful that we are not describing somebody based on a secondary characteristic, right? So I know for people watching, it might be a little silent for a second, but if everybody can kind of take a look at that first column and take a second, think about them, jot something down, and then we could just kind of go through, and if anybody has any ideas of how we might word that in a more mindful way, we can start going through them. So I'm saying these as means so everybody watching can know what we're doing, and not necessarily something that I would say in life. So she is psychotic, they are retarded. Again, I'm sure most of us know that that's a really offensive and outdated term. I hear it a lot. He is wheelchair bound and she is delayed. Yeah. Yep.
I think another important term is crazy.
Oh yeah,
Because
definitely.
for me personally, it's very offensive to have, I say that I do not have PTSD, I survived PTSD because I am not my illness. But to be described all the time as crazy, because a lot of behaviors I can't explain, but I can't help it. I was the person during class who would just start crying. And I was very blessed to have psychology professors before I even know what's wrong with me, because the brain's a beautiful thing. It will block out all types of memories. You can go months and then all of a sudden, at a snap of, you remember everything. So just being described as crazy, oh, she's crazy, and just being, that stigmatized me, that separated me. I was isolated at my school, and that's when I needed the help and support the most.
Or hysteric. Hysteria is a gender, right? Has a
Feminized.
gender base.
And when we think of the word crazy too, I mean, in our society we say a lot of things are crazy. And when you think about what we're really saying, what does that mean to somebody who has some kind of mental health diagnosis that is quote unquote described as crazy? Well, that person's really going through something and may be suffering, or it may be hard for them. So when we use the term crazy to describe like, oh, that party was crazy last night, what message is that sending to everybody else?
Right.
And just thinking about how the intersection, again, we work with people with disabilities who are survivors of domestic violence. So a lot of times we hear our clients say, my abuser tried to gaslight me, essentially. They tried to call me crazy, tried to discredit me as a human, as a person who can speak for themselves and who can advocate for themselves. So we hear that a lot.
I've had clients who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia who say, sometimes I don't even know if the abuse happened myself because I've been told that so many times. Are you sure that happened? That they start to question it themselves. So people are questioning their own lived experience. So it's very powerful.
Yes,
All right. Has everyone had a chance to kind of look through? Does anyone want to, first one, disabled person, anyone have any thoughts?
That's a person with a disability.
Yep, excellent. There's that person first language we're talking about. A person who has a disability. So we're never saying disabled person because they're a person first and foremost.
The one thing I never liked about the word disabled too, it's like saying you're not able. Like, the word itself is like
Belittling.
not empowering at all.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And going off of that, I mean, sometimes you hear differently abled as well, which can also be problematic because if we break that down, what we're saying is normal is based on what? That's a social construct that somebody kind of made up, that this is what normal is. So to be differently abled, what does that even mean?
And that's the danger of the American language because everything's so dichotomous.
Yes.
And you can't just put everything in a category, good, bad, black, white. Like, there's a middle ground, so you're just automatically segregating and separating, and you're creating this discriminatory language based on this set of dichotomy. Like, what disabled person, you're just breaking the word able apart instead of looking at a new vocabulary you can use.
Definitely. Okay, the second one, handicapped people. Does anyone have any ideas?
Going with the theme of person
Well,
first.
going of the first, people with disabilities.
Yep. Same. Okay. Next one is he is bipolar. Bipolar disorder in and of itself is not necessarily offensive, but how we're wording it. So if we really want to try to be as inclusive as possible, some examples might be a person, again, because we're not assuming anyone's gender, right? We just have this random statement here. We don't know how this person identifies. So we could say a person with features of bipolar disorder, or an individual with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So that's where you're getting that they're a person and maybe they do have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but that we're not saying they're bipolar, because again, we hear that when you hear people getting called bipolar because maybe they were happy yesterday and today they're sad, and we're saying, oh, they're so bipolar. So that's why we want to really break that down. We may be adding a few extra words. It takes 2 seconds, so to really, and it's hard because we like to shorten everything in our language. We're trying to say things as quickly as possible. But we really want to be mindful of changing the way we think. So we're always putting the person first.
Okay, the next one, she is psychotic.
This one's a little tricky too, kind of like the last one.
This person has a diagnosis of psychosis.
Also, a person who is experiencing psychotic features. That one's, even breaks it down a little bit more, because when somebody's experiencing psychosis, there might be different symptoms they're experiencing. So rather than saying someone is psychotic, again, that term comes with a lot of connotations. So we don't want to label people unnecessarily.
So would it be better to say a person who is experiencing psychosis features than a person who is experiencing psychosis?
It depends. I personally like the term features better because, in our society we like to label people, and sometimes people can experience features of psychosis without having a diagnosis of psychosis. So, me personally, I try as best I can if I don't have to label someone with one of those terms, because we know that a mental health diagnosis, especially of something like psychosis in our society, holds a lot of weight and can really stigmatize a person. So whenever you can not put the official label, that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, and then same thing with the previous example, they are bipolar or a person with bipolar features. Like, a lot of our clients aren't officially diagnosed with their mental health issues. So if they say, I feel like I might be experiencing features of bipolar, that's a better way to sort of discuss how they're feeling and what they're going through without labeling them and not diagnosing them.
And I think it's very important to destigmatize mental illness, because when I see these two phrases, he is bipolar, she is psychotic, I immediately think, has this person been diagnosed with such?
Yes.
Because this is language we hear so regularly, and people interpret she is psychotic as an offensive thing. A lot of times if a woman's acting out, oh yeah, she's psychotic, she's like, oh, if she's standing up for her rights, she's psychotic. Oh, if she is deviating from the norm, if she's standing up for herself, if she's powerful, she's psychotic. I think it's better if this person actually is psychotic or experiencing a psychotic episode. This person is experiencing an emotional struggle.
Yes.
I think there's ways that you can have sensitive undertones, because
Definitely.
when somebody is experiencing a psychotic episode, just hearing that language can be terrifying to them, because mental illness is still so stigmatized. So there's going to be some steps we need to take in our language before we hear phrases like he's bipolar and she's psychotic that won't be problematic.
And I like what you just said about emotional struggle, because when you think of the term emotional disturbance, like what does that mean? And that's a pretty official term when we talk about emotional disturbance. You look in the DSM, it'll say that. What does that mean, disturbance?
Yeah, and this is women gender studies. We're always told that we need to suppress our emotions as women, or that we feel too much, because when you think about it, the way men and women are conditioned to deal with anything emotional is so different. Women, what do? We internalize our anger. What does that lead to? Depression, self-harm, isolation, anxiety. Men, how are they taught to learn to deal with their sadness? They need to be angry. They need to physically be harmful with their vocabulary and their actions. So there's, again, a dichotomy based on language.
Definitely.
And I would even say too, like adding to that, as even like challenging the status quo of the DSM, because it's good to have that perspective. It's also good to see the world from a different angle. Like my community, we don't accept the term like depression. We say a spirit of sadness is visiting me. And when I acknowledge that spirit, then I can proceed on my path, you know? And that's not to romanticize, that's how it is. That's as straight as the arrow goes. So I think that that's important too. I'm a social worker. I have to follow the DSM Bible as well. At the same time, how are we allowing this to be the default? So allowing that other cultures around the world see it as someone who has that mental illness is taking on the evil spirits, so that we don't have to live with those mental illnesses. So there's different layers to how we see these things.
For those people who may not be familiar, can you just explain what the DSM is?
So
Go ahead.
it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual.
Yes.
There are 5 versions of it. The most current is the 5th one.
Yes.
And it basically lists all of the diagnostic mental illnesses that we have.
Criteria.
The criteria per, I guess, mental illness. So, for example, schizophrenia, and it's separated into categories. So there's mood disorders, anxiety, personality disorders, things like that, and et cetera. Yes. So the criteria is pretty strict, I would say, and very limiting. So it's like you have to exhibit features of A, B, and C, or for 6 months or longer, it's this. 6 months or less, it's that, and it's very, very strict.
And I would say it's also very like westernized,
Yes.
and
Limited.
it's numeric, so you get a code. Like we're put into
a number.
codes, and we it goes into a linear time, but most folks' time is not linear, time is cyclical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that need to be worked on, but it is one avenue that folks actually, at the same time, even though I'm critiquing the DSM, at the same time, it is one method to helping people recognize what it is that's going on inside. And at the same time, it's limiting in that it focuses on the individual rather than the context of what's going on, like historical trauma. Like maybe a Native person who's consuming alcohol isn't a drunk Indian. Maybe it's the historical trauma of the layers of policies, not just from 1492, but Standing Rock, what's happening at Standing Rock. Maybe that's leading to one to say, this society is not for me, so I'm gonna numb out, and I'm actually gonna like keep myself warm by drinking. And that kind of makes logistical sense to survive.
And I think that's the language is so important. These are psychology terms, psychology language. We're living in a Western society. So for me, with my mental health background, I've been in the mental health field for 3 years. I had to back down because this language is not inclusive to different cultures at all. And it's very hard for me to not acknowledge my indigenous side, not acknowledge my spirituality, not acknowledge the gifts that my grandmother has taught me in terms of treating people that have issues. I mean, that have sort of, when they're dealing with something traumatic or having some sort of issue. That's why I enjoyed the conference that we were at, the Women of Color and Solidarity that Florcy was at, as well as this young woman over here, beautiful, because I was able to say, I'm in this space where I don't have to practice my Western culture. I don't have to use these sort of tools that they tell me I have to use with clients. And it's a really hard balance, because if my friends are going through a hard time, or they're like, hey, like, I know you're a counselor, they'll come to me, they're like, hey, can you please smudge me? Can you heal me? Can you give me Reiki? Can you practice your medicine with me? And it's so different, because this is that's my identity. That's a huge part of my culture. So when I'm walking into the office, to not be able to bring that with me. Or it's like when one of my young woman that was my client, who's experiencing depression, and I had to ask her a stupid question because it's in my manual. Why are you depressed? She looked at me, she said, Donald Trump is my president. I'm an African woman. How do you expect me to not be happy? She's like, are you gonna prescribe me pills? And do you think that's gonna erase the fact that he's my president and I'm not safe? And I'm like, how do you even navigate that field? And that's, again, the importance of language and the constructs that we are taught scientifically. And it's not acknowledging different cultures, because, again, it's dichotomous. And if it's not Western, it's automatically other. It's wrong. It's, oh, what's your degree in? Did you learn that in class? And even for me personally, I go to a medicine doctor, and in order for him to be able to practice his medicine, be recognized here, he had to go to medical school here. But at the same token, he acknowledges the fact that when I tell him, hey, my friends don't get it, I'm having a spiritual illness. I'm feeling all my ancestors. I'm feeling generations of trauma. When you say that to anybody else, if I'm saying that to a white face, they're like, bitch, you're crazy. Bitch, you're black. Like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, you just do not understand.
Right.
Well, I mean, we see that all the time. You know, somebody comes in and, you know, they're talking about how they speak with their ancestors who have passed. Oh, well, they're hallucinating.
Exactly. Let's give them some medicine. They don't acknowledge culture. And
You had your hand raised earlier.
Thank you. I've had a problem for a little while with the way that, okay, so let me start over. Something that troubles me is on the streets of New York, there is a very high homeless population. And the way that every person individually exists in this world as a homeless person is their own individual experience. And it's difficult to see sometimes how I think that person is suffering. And so it's hard for me to like hear how people talk about people that are living on the street and that are featuring these kinds of symptoms, or experiencing psychosis, or experiencing any other denomination of a mental health issue, perhaps, that is not being addressed, and yet they're just being labeled, that person is, I mean, that's just a crazy homeless person. You know, it's just really hard for me. And the idea that they're displaying a behavior and that it's not actual behavior, but that it almost like it's like a performance. I don't understand how.
what's the appropriate language to use? Yeah.
Like, I just see it as that person is experiencing a real moment of suffering right now. If they're taking to the streets screaming, something's wrong.
Exactly.
In my mind. But for somebody to say that that person is displaying, you know, psychotic behavior, I still think is problematic.
I agree.
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking in terms of, I know we're coming from more of a social work perspective, like in our agency, when we have to determine if somebody is eligible for our services based on our funders. I know, I'm sure you know all about that. But but you're right. I mean, who is it to say that person is even struggling? I mean, they might just be doing their day-to-day business, and maybe they're talking to themselves because that's who else is talking to them. You know, that's how they cope. And for a lot of people to see that, it's scary. Especially if you don't have an understanding of mental illness. So we're saying, oh, they're having, you know, they're experiencing a psychotic episode. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're just going through their day-to-day. So that, you're right, is very problematic in and of itself.
Yeah, and I think it's also a testament to how New York City deals with mental illness, or I guess I should say does not deal with mental illness, in that there is not enough supportive housing or mental health treatment for these people who may or may not need it. We sort of just hope that if we build more shelters, that will help the homeless crisis, or whatever we're calling it now, instead of actually giving them or offering them the services that they may or may not need, sort of just dismissing them and putting them in their own little box.
Or how you were saying earlier about, we're not looking at the big picture. We're just looking at this one aspect. Oh, they're homeless. Oh, well, they must have a substance abuse history. So we won't allow them to have any of these services or housing until they deal with that problem. But in reality, if we're looking at the big picture, we have to treat the environment before, that's a symptom of the disease. Exactly. We got to treat the disease before we can, if we treat every individual symptom, that doesn't work. And that also goes into exactly what you're saying, assumptions people make about homeless people on the street, or people who are homeless. And we don't really know what the situation is. So the answer is not always treat this, treat that, get a job, then you'll be able to afford an apartment, because that may not be the order in which that person would be helped.
I want to be mindful of the time. It's 12:25.
Yeah.
So maybe maybe we could send the information to all of you about some, because I do want to definitely hear from Noel.
I feel like I'm talking. Okay, sure. All right. Okay.
We want more.
Okay, all right. Are you ready? Okay, so I think some of the problematic terms are like Pocahontas, like Pocahontas, like Halloween costumes, the sexualization and the objectification of Native women's bodies since colonial contact. And that goes into patriarchy versus like being introduced to matriarchy. And patriarchy meaning patriarchy and its brother, like Christianity, in the way that it's been introduced in this context. Being introduced to our sister matriarchy or matrilineal, the structure of sacred life givers, sacred life givers. So women, indigenous like females who have the gift to give life or choose to give life, because not all women choose to bear children, were in charge of their economies for thousands and thousands of years. And I come from that community. Men, my grandfather taught me what men do. They follow protocol, which is to listen to the women, because we know where to plant. That's the best place for planting. We know how to see which berries are poisonous and which are not. Some men are colorblind, like they don't see the colors. And even the words we use, our default in Apache language is to the female, the woman. It's not to the men. And our nouns is not person, place, or thing. You don't put a person with a thing in the same category. A person is themselves, their spirit within like their body, and then their clans. So it tells you who's related to who. So I'm Eagle, I can't marry an Eagle clan. That's for genetic safety. There's kinship, so who are your ancestors, where did they come from? And there's land base, what part of the region. I can tell you like the latitude and the longitude of where my people gained consciousness, where Creator gave us consciousness. And that's a holy place. And that tells you your spirituality, that all of those things tell you your genetic memory that we all have. We are all indigenous to this earth. We're all indigenous to a place. And so women, we're the sacred life givers. We know where to talk to the corn, the three sisters. So there's beans, corn, and squash. Those are the three sisters. tomatoes and potatoes are also indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. We know all of these different things that we take for granted in a society, but it was always the women who did that. But when, colonialism came, it brought some things on its boat. It brought the concept of borders and individualism, and it brought the concept of ownership, that children were to be owned by their parents and that women were to be property of men. And we're still sobering up from that past. We see remnants of it. It's this like furniture you can't get rid of, but you don't know where to take it. And so I think as a Native woman, I can see, as an Indigenous woman, I can see this context from the perspective of being an Apache woman. And I can see how problematic and unsustainable this economy is and this structure. I can see how words are shaping and impacting Native youth. We have the highest, Native youth have the highest rates of suicide in the country. Who has been to a reservation? Anyone been to a territory? So even the word reservation is a colonial term. There's a continuum of Native folks. Some extreme Indigenous Native folks say that reservations are concentration camps. Mm-hmm. And if you study your history, it'll tell you that Hitler idolized the American government for its practices of Native peoples to eliminate them. And there were, anthropologists estimate, like 100 million people, Native people in the Western Hemisphere, were completely wiped out by force, not just because settlers, colonizers had the flu and coughed on us. They gave us smallpox intentionally. That's chemical warfare. They Apache women, there's stories that our nipples were chopped off, that our vaginas were cut out, massacres that we're not taught, and they would put the body parts on their horse saddles and ride them out, or ride the nipples of Native women on a necklace. We're not taught that. They put Native women in dog kennels at Standing Rock, Morton County. So it's the same thing happening over and over. There's Native women missing and murdered in Canada. And some of the Native women, one case was, she was murdered, a Native woman was murdered, and not the defense, but what is the other side? Prosecution, actually, who was supposed to be defending her, they actually took her body and dismembered her and showed her actual genitalia to the jury and handed it one person to look at it, to try and show the jury that she was mutilated and raped. So this is a cycle that continues to happen. 1 out of 3 Native women, and that's only Native women who report, are sexually assaulted. They're going to be raped in their lifetime. It's not a matter of if, but when. So that's a dark side of what it means to be a Native woman. And you have, Cheeto 45, who says, she doesn't look like an Indian to me. So that brings up this idea of what does an Indian look like? What does a Native woman look like? And you brought up 3/5 of a man, 3/5 of a person. Natives are the only minority who have to have a card that shows our status as Native people. I have my Indian card. It shows your blood quantum. They cut us up into blood quantums. So if you had a pizza pie and you cut it up into 26 slices, or 32 slices, 26 of those slices will be Apache by the government standard. And the rest are Spanish, because we all have the blood of our conquerors inside of us, unfortunately. And so I'm 2632 Apache by the government standards. And you have to be 1/4 Apache to get services, to be federally recognized by this government. So when you hear these stereotypes of natives get money, natives get free things, actually we don't. You have to go through all of these hoops to even get the minimum. Sometimes prison inmates get health care that are at higher quality than native folks, and that's not to play Oppression Olympics, that's to keep it real. That's to tell you what it's like. And 8 out of 10 natives actually live off the res, and we do pay taxes. So those are some of the dark side of what it means to be a Native woman, but I don't like to start the story with since contact, because like I said earlier, my ancestors were here way before that. We were busy keeping our societies intact with nature, with the laws of the land. And I come from like a powerful, very powerful people. And we can see like how problematic this society is with just even the way that it addresses or lack of like acknowledgement of Native peoples, of the land that we occupy, and we don't really spend enough time listening to the narratives of Native women. And why is that? I think we're not ready to sit with our discomfort. We're not ready to raise our consciousness to a next level. And that's, to me, exciting. We should be doing that more often. We should be asking these questions and interrogating ourselves on a consistent basis. So that's makes sense.
I'd like to know if you could share with us how those of us in the audience here can engage in that work. If there's resources that we can tap into and how we can kind of lift up those voices.
Sure. So a couple of my friends and I started a collective called Women Warriors Work. And we're doing a couple of different campaigns. And they're Native women from many different nations. There's 566 federally recognized nations in the U.S., what's known as North America. So we come from different nations. We have sovereignty rights. And we came together to address Native issues that we experience by the dominant society. So one of the issues is addressing Halloween costumes. And we're working on more things, but also addressing the Washington football team, the mascots. So you can do direct action. You can do something as a start, like not saying the actual name of the Washington football team. Start referring to it as the Washington football team. And the same with all the mascots you see. You can start with acknowledging the Lenape people when you go to different events, whenever you're speaking. You can also reach out to different organizations. The American Indian Community House is a nonprofit organization in New York City. They need volunteers. You can also do your research on cultural appropriation. Coachella just happened. And people really don't understand. I mean, I think that they don't want to understand. I think that we live in a consumer society, as she mentioned. 70% of what we buy, 70% of the time, we have to buy things. We don't fix things. We don't sew our shirts back together. We go out and buy a new one. We have that capitalistic mentality in the society. So Coachella happened, the headdress, and it's like, I say, it's like...
No, could you,
sure.
Many people may not be aware of Coachella. Do you want to just describe that?
It's a music festival in California, and you can wear, like, people wear huge, like, typical headdresses with the feathers, and that's problematic. It's almost as if wearing walking around and each of us putting on a FDNY 9/11 first responder badge and just sewing it to our shirts and just being like, yeah, I was there, I helped. No, you weren't there at 9/11. It's disrespectful. It's claiming something that is not yours to claim because you think it's cool. And from what I'm told, it's only men wear it. Women have, it's as if like men from another society came here and just, started wearing something like really short mini skirts. Like they would look probably kind of funny in our society. And their stuff would be hanging out, like it would not be good. That's the same thing for what the headdresses. You're being offensive because you're wearing that. And it takes you a whole lifetime to earn like one feather. It takes like a lot of, I'm not sure of their protocols for that nation, but it does take a long time to earn a feather. And so, yeah, go ahead.
In Coachella, a lot of women will also wear the Indian bindi, which, so I have a Muslim background, so it's actually more offensive to Hindu women because for Hindu women, it signifies their third eye. And so the same kind of thing, like, I don't know anything about Hinduism, I didn't understand third eye, but I'm just gonna claim that because that's what colonialism does. It goes into another culture and says, oh, I think this is kind of cute, I'm gonna take it. It's like me going into your house and being like, I like your MacBook, I'm just gonna take that.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem with appropriation, because what you're doing is you're taking a feature of another culture and glorifying it, but you're not taking with you any of the oppression, any of the hardships, any of the discrimination, any of the sexualization. And all I can think about is language used towards black bodies. I was bullied growing up because I have big lips. I was bullied growing up because I have big eyes, and each part of my body is a part of one of my identities. And you're basically just chopping it away. Like, I had to experience so much sexualization at a younger age because women of color, we have our wider hips, we have bigger buttocks, we have big breasts, and that's to show that we're able to give birth. Those are our features that are biological, and to be sexualized at such a young age. And it's like when I hear of these celebrities, and on the low, I'm ashamed. I do like the Kardashians, but I'm woke and conscious, so there's this dichotomy and this dissonance. But I'm just like, you're taking features from our bodies that we've had to face so much discrimination, so much sexualization, so much bullying, so much torment, so much pain, and you're literally taking pieces of our body. You're taking our wider hips, you're taking our buttock, you're taking our lips injections, and that's what disturbs me the most. Why is it okay for you to have my lips, but for me to have my lips, I face so much? And that's another thing about language, like this new phrase, oh, what do them lips do? Like, with my lips, I would like, exactly, why are my lips sexualized? Right. With my lips, I would like to kiss you, but immediately your lips are perceived as a receptacle of another man's cum, and that's very disturbing. That's what our lips have been sexualized for. And who has it been sexualized by? The white man. There's so much fetishizing and...
Which is interesting. The word appropriation comes from the Catholic Church. Like, it stems from appropriation of land in 1454, the Papal Romus Pontifex. So Catholicism is very deeply rooted. The word reality is royale. It's this way in which we see the world. So it's not really an indigenous term, reality. It goes back to the crown, and the Pope allowed for the appropriation of land if people are not Christian and you happen to come upon them, a land, and you happen to come upon a people and they're not Christian. The Pope deemed it. It's called the doctrine of discovery, and it's the law of the land, and the U.S. Government brought it into this country, this government, and so now the doctrine of discovery is the same law we abide by in the American context. So it allows for savages, heathens, non-Christian people to not be people. They're more like nature. They're like the four-legged or the winged. And so that really studying the history, because even that.
And it's using Western religion as to push your hidden agenda. Oh, it's not about, oh, this land is nice, we could take it. It's, oh, we need to bring Christianity to these people because they're savages and we're helping them. And it just brings me back to my grandmother having a Syrian father and having to be sent to boarding schools and having to be beat by the Catholic nuns because she's different, and having to be forced into a religion that's not our people, that's not our culture, where our tribe is so small it's nearly extinct, and having to just literally beat out another part of you, and using, oh, it's God. Maybe that's your God, but that's not spirit. And using, and that's just the most dangerous thing you can use, is use religion as a form of control. And also, this young lady had her hand up, so I want to acknowledge that.
I want to know, like, what you're talking about. Like, is there like a fine line between like appreciating someone's culture and then like taking, you know, like let's say like you really like the style of like the way they use their clothing or whatever, so you want to incorporate that into your own life. So I don't know, like, is there like a difference?
It's a good question. I feel like I think it varies and it takes more work on you as a consumer, because you say a lot with your money. Is that money that to buy that, let's say, turquoise necklace, is that money going back to the community of the grandmother who like worked so hard to, you know, put that necklace on, or is it going to this store where this person's profiting 500% off of what that grandmother got? It takes extra work, but that's necessary because that's sometimes the only power we have as consumers, right? It takes work to look up Native artists. You were gonna say something?
Yeah, and I think going off of that, I think it's definitely where you purchase your, I guess, aesthetic from, and I hate to call it an aesthetic because that scarf that I have right there, my grandmother makes those, and she makes them from El Salvador and Guatemala, so that takes a lot of like craft. Weaving and craft to make that. And even when we go back to like, you go back to like our specific part of that country, like it's only indigenous people who, they don't buy it off of us. They'll go to Urban Outfitters and buy that same scarf for like $80. So, and then try to kind of claim that culture, but not claim the struggle that comes with it. So I think it's just being cognizant of your intentions and where your money is going to.
Exactly.
Of that.
And that's
piece.
why we're lucky we have media. Like a lot of things that I want to purchase, I know if it's not from my tribe, but I like the jewelry, I'll make sure I do research and I say, oh, this was made by this particular person that's going where. Or I'll speak to somebody from that tribe. I like that. I'll in exchange for either if you want to do it money-wise, or I'll trade something with you. Like there's ways that you can appreciate a culture by getting it yourself from there. Same thing with tokens. When I go to certain places and I see that you're buying these like African masks or headdresses, why are you buying it from Marshall's? Everything that's in my house, that is from my uncle's trip to Mali. That's from my parents' trip to Haiti. That's from my family's trip to Turkey. Like, there's ways that you can appreciate a culture. Appreciation and appropriation, I think, are two different things. And that's the fine line, going back and saying, where can I get this?
Right.
Just to stem off from like the difference between appreciation and appropriation, it also depends where you get it from, not really like money-wise or the store. So for example, a couple of weeks ago, the MSA, the Muslim Student Association here at Hunter, had this like little event where they're like, come and try on a hijab, like a headpiece, a headscarf, and a turban. And they were putting it on you. They were the ones introducing you, inviting you into their culture. And that's different from like going to Urban Outfitters and like be like, oh, I'm gonna buy this sticker and put it on my head and it's a bindi. That's different. It's different when you're invited, when you're respecting it from like an outside point of view, but not going in and claiming it as, oh, I know what this is, like I'm just gonna use it as I want. Like you have to know the distinction where it's not like if you like wear a scarf or whatever, you're instantly appropriating. You just have to understand how you're approaching that like item or that subject.
And
I really love that, and I know we only have about 10 minutes left. I do want to bring that to intentionality. I know we said we would talk about words and language, and we've actually talked a lot about psychology and the history, because it would be impossible for us to sit down and list every problematic word. It would take the rest of our lives and we still wouldn't get through. So that's where intentionality comes in. I myself have used ableist language in the past. I have done things that are wrong. I think the difference is, we don't know what we don't know. That's just how it works. The difference is if somebody is pointing out to you that you're doing something offensive, then what are you doing? That is the difference. No one is perfect. We're all going to make mistakes. I've been pretty public on social media, so I've made public mistakes. But it's really, how do you respond when somebody points out that something you're doing is hurtful? And somebody had their hand raised.
I just want to have a question. If you can briefly address if in the manual, the GID, which is
DSM?
DSM, gender identity disorder,
right,
is that still part of that? And in the Two Spirits, is that still part of much of our Native American culture? Or?
Right. So I can speak for my community because we're not like a monolithic Native American community. My community, we acknowledge Two-Spirit, and we call them Nigle. So it means you have masculine and feminine spirits, and you're actually at a higher heightened consciousness than the rest of us because you're able to, your role is different in that you can see things in ways that my feminine, female spirit can't always see. So we acknowledge them, and they're actually seen as, oftentimes they're medicine people, so we go to them to get healed, to interpret our dreams, to call us out if we're not following protocol. So we very much still practice the acknowledgement of Two-Spirit. I think with colonization, though, we're very homophobic, and I think even that's a problematic word, but we're still very we shame them, which tells you where we're at in our history of folks. Has anyone heard the term Two-Spirit? Mm-hmm. Okay, right. And that word is kind of also unfortunately being appropriated by, it's being synonymous with queer or LGBT. And it's not quite, because it doesn't, the history is different, and also the role and responsibilities of Two-Spirit folks in our communities.
Could you just explain what Two-Spirit means for those people who don't know?
The way I was taught was you have both female and male, not even female and male. It's hard to describe in English, but it's Creator gave you two gifts. Gave you the gift of what your biology says, and also gave you the gift of what the other biology of whether you're a female, biologically female, and then male energy. So English is a very limiting language, so it's harder to explain in words. I'm sorry. Did you have a question on that term?
The Two-Spirit, I was just wondering the difference between, I thought everybody had masculine and feminine energies within them that need to be balanced. So what's the difference between Two-Spirit and having both those energies within you and a normal person?
Well, not normal, I would say, but I get what you're saying. The way I'm taught is that in Two-Spirit individuals, they go to ceremony, and they have different protocols that they carry out in ceremony, and things that I wouldn't necessarily be allowed to carry. So it's, what I'm told is the medicine people recognize folks who have Two-Spirit. It's not for me to say that
this is the criteria, the DSM criteria of what Two-Spirit is. It's like we all do have a like female or feminine and masculine energy within us, but it's more of like in my community, our medicine people kind of know.
So there's like an initiation sort of.
It's more of like what I'm told is like dreams in my community are really important. So if someone comes up and they have this kind of dream and the medicine people hear it, or if someone comes up and they start just automatically, I know the Navajo Nation, they have like hand tremblers, which their hand will kind of like shake a little. There's different things that come up that you just kind of recognize. Every community is different though, yeah.
I just had a quick question to anyone who's willing to answer about gendering terms. So I know myself, I proclaim myself to be feminist while acknowledging the racist history of feminism. With that said, I go back and forth between, looking at gendering terms as whether it's perpetuating the patriarchy, which is a system of social governance through which we all have to navigate life through, or if it's in its own way dismantling patriarchy. Because when we apply women's before, we're actively engaging in othering an entire gender, again rooted in social construction, such as women's leadership. I do a lot of work around women's leadership, which is implying that all women, all persons who identify as being women, should have some type of leadership model that falls under the social construction of women's leadership versus leadership, which is to the point that you made, the assumption of the generic masculine. And so I'm just curious to hear your thoughts, because I know for myself, I struggle with women's leadership or women's issues. Only women are impacted by the certain issue, which is a very narrow focus, which does not look into the broader social, political, economic impact, rooted again in women or with persons who identify as being women. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts of gendering terms, whether it's dismantling the patriarchy or if it's perpetuating the patriarchy.
I mean, the way I look at it, so Noel and I talked a little bit about this. I come from a long line of women activists. So I've known my purpose in life. My mother is sitting right there, actually, and amazing feminist. So I've known my purpose basically all my life, even before I had the words. And my heart is always with the most oppressed, with the people who are being the most oppressed. So right now in our patriarchal society, that's people who present as female. And so I'm going to use gendered language, unfortunately, because that's where we are as a society in our reality. I would love for us to get to a place where that's not an issue anymore, but that's where my heart is always going to go. I'm also a type A personality, so I want to be very efficient. But every issue is a women's issue because there's no group that doesn't include women. So this whole idea of women's rights being a separate thing does not make any sense to me. I also have flyers with some of the information that we discussed, and it actually has the Twitter handles of us. So if you want to keep in touch with any of us, you can do so. We'll also, if you contact Carmelina, she can also give you our information, but the flyers does have our information also. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being a great audience.